Do I look like a booktuber? Here, I'm going to practice. Booktube. Welcome to my booktube. Just kidding. I have never seen a booktube video in my whole life, which I should probably not admit and should maybe change. Anyway, hello, Patreon friends. Happy end of January. I told you I was going to keep things interesting, keep things fresh and fun on Patreon in 2021, and I'm trying to follow through. This is a new perk, second new perk actually already, of the year, and at the end of every month, I'm going to share with you a video recapping all of my thoughts about the non-podcast grown-up books that I've read over the course of that month. So I try to review a lot of the grown-up books that I read in various places. When I finish books, I post about them on Instagram story, but here's the thing, I get really afraid that somehow an author or publisher is going to see if I say something critical, and so I am if I'm being lukewarm about a book, that kind of means I didn't like it if it's on Instagram. And then on the newsletter, the Patreon newsletter, I'm a little bit more honest, but it's still not that much space to talk about a book. So here on these monthly video recaps, I'm going to try to be a little bit more honest, a little bit more comprehensive, and hopefully this will help you decide what books to add and not add to your TBR list. Hope you enjoy. If not, I guess let me know, and I will find something else cool to offer here on Patreon. So I'm going to talk about my January reading today. I've decided that in the interest of having a rating system, at least this month, we'll see how it goes, I'm going to rate things as an S for an SS for good, and an SSR for loved, must read, gotta love it. I will let you know, I'm pretty generous with my ratings. So I don't use Goodreads, as many of you know, but I have a little book log reading tracker on Google Docs that I use, and I rate everything on a scale of 1 to 5. It's very, very rare that I give something below a 3. It's just who I am. So bear that in mind as I give my ratings. That's why I'm only giving 3 different rating levels. And take my ratings with a grain of salt, because I'm not sure that they would necessarily match a similar rating system for somebody who felt the same way about a book as I did, if that makes sense. Let's get into it. Okay, so I'm going to start with Gold Fame Citrus by Claire V. Watkins. This is an ARC that I've had in my possession for 5 years, 6 years. I very rarely I've never said what publishing house I worked for, but this is a good hint because this is an ARC that I got from my old office. So if you have always wanted to know what publisher I worked for, look up Gold Fame Citrus. I didn't work for this imprint, but I worked for the publishing house. So Gold Fame Citrus is by Claire V. Watkins. I had a lot of friends who loved this book when it was circulating in the office as an ARC, and so I've been hoarding this for years and moved it all over, different offices, different apartments, different homes. Finally decided to read it because we read a short story of Claire V. Watkins in one of my grad school classes last semester. Also, look how pretty this ARC is. You know that a publisher has high hopes for a book when they do this kind of foil effect on an ARC. There's even French flaps. So they had big hopes for this book. I don't think it did that great. So, so that's the bad news. Other bad news, I skimmed the last 100 pages of the book. I flew through the first 75 pages. I loved the premise. It's about this couple that's living in an abandoned actress's mansion in California because there's been massive droughts everywhere. There's no more water. It's sort of this environmental, what's the word I'm looking for? Guys, I didn't sleep at all last night, so what is the name of the genre that The Hunger Games is part of? That genre. It will come to me later. But with an environmental twist, because the country is in the state that it's in because of all of these environmental disasters that have taken place. There's also a sort of storyline about how certain groups of people are being deported out of the country into camps. So there's just a lot going on. I'm just going to look up what this... Wait, hold on. It's coming to me. What is the name of this genre? I know you're all yelling at me. Hold on. Hunger Games. You're resting on my computer right now. Genre. Dystopian. It's environmental dystopia, this book. I loved this notion of these two people who had kind of found love in a hopeless place, and they're living off of what this rich actress has left behind. And then they meet this baby who's been abandoned, and so they adopt her. And I thought it was really interesting. The writing is like spectacular. The writing gets like an SSRRRRRRR. Like the writing is so good. But the last third of the book just totally lost my interest. And I'm going to be honest with you, between reading for the podcast and now reading for grad school, I have to be real about what I want to read. My time is very limited for like pleasure reading, and so I made the executive decision to kind of skim through so that I would have an opinion and like a sense of the plot in the rest of the book, but I was not super crazy about the story plot-wise, or maybe it just wasn't the right time for me. So I'm going to give the writing an SSRRRRR. See, I'm already like finding ways to get around a rating system. But for me, like as a reading experience, this was an S. So take that as you will. Okay, next. Kevin Kwan's Sex and Vanity. So obviously Crazy Rich Asians is great, right? Like I only read the first book in the series. I do need to change that. I need to read the rest of the series at some point. But more foil. We have some beautiful foil covers this month to discuss, and it's going to be very distracting for me while I finish the rest of this recap. I was skeptical a little bit, and actually, when we talked about this book during our Patreon party last month, someone mentioned that this was a retelling of A Room of One's Own, which I never read. I had no idea. A Room with a View. I'm so tired, you guys. I'm so tired. A Room with a View. I don't think A Room of One's Own is a book. I had never read A Room with a View. I actually don't know very much about it. So then I was like, oh, am I like qualified to read this book? Well, I enjoy it as much, not knowing the context for it. I enjoyed the hell out of this book. I read most of it in a day. Now that I'm doing this like, phone free time every weekend, I had like the most fun reading probably the second half of this book in essentially a single sitting, a Sunday, a couple of weeks ago. And I love that it spans like a long time period. It's about this group of people that kind of all meet and interact with each other at this like super glamorous wedding in Capri. And then there's like a little bit of a romance, like a scandalous romance. And then it fast forwards to 5 years later to some of these people like re-entering each other's lives and everything getting sort of mixed up. Even though like we thought that we had moved past the wedding, we thought we'd moved past that drama, but no, because in Sex and Vanity you come back and we had to tie up all of those loose ends that happened at the wedding. So I really enjoyed this one. I loved all of the glamour that Kevin Kwan writes about, as I mentioned in the newsletter, and I think also in my Instagram story. Nobody writes glamour like this man. I don't care who you are. I want to live in this glamorous world, and I can't wait to read more of his work. Incidentally, I recently started watching Bling Empire, I believe it's called, on Netflix, which has been billed as sort of like a Crazy Rich Asians on screen, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm only about halfway through. But if you are looking for something that's sort of reminiscent of Crazy Rich Asians, as well as Sex and Vanity on screen, I would recommend that. I'm going to go ahead and give this an SSR. Boom. Final answer. Anna Kay. Okay, so here's the deal with Anna Kay. Speaking of glamour, love the glamorous world that we get in this book. I think that it's like what Gossip Girl could have been. I think it's what Gossip Girl is supposed to be in 2021. If you listen to the Gossip Girl episodes of the podcast, we know that there's a lot of issues with the way that like wealth is presented. There's a lot of issues about the way that like sex is presented, at least the way that we see it. It feels very sex negative. There's a lot of really dicey depictions of eating disorders and addiction and that kind of thing. So Anna Kay like takes the Gossip Girl model of like, let's have a bunch of really rich kids doing fabulous things in New York City, and makes it much richer so that it feels like those problematic things are not problematic. This is not like a perfect ideal world. These characters are dealing with things like addiction, but this book gives a much more balanced view of it, and it feels at the risk of sounding like it's a more woke version of Gossip Girl, which I appreciated, especially because I read 2 Gossip Girl books in the last year. I really enjoyed the characters. The writing is spectacular. It's super detailed, and I just really liked it. For me, it was long. For me, it went on a little long. I probably could have done with like maybe even 75 or 100 fewer pages, that might just be a personal thing. Maybe it was just like the moment in which I was reading the book. It sort of, for me, felt like it was dragging at the end. That being said, had a great time reading it, loved the writing, and this made me miss New York, but also like this was not the New York that I was living in because it's like fancy, wealthy New York. So, you know, Gossip Girl-esque in that way. I'm going to go ahead and give this an SS. I want to give it an SSR because I really liked the writing and I loved the world building, and Jenny Lee was so lovely to be on the podcast. But I'm going to try to be honest here, and I'm going to take off that R because it felt long, and that for me was a struggle. I don't have time to read books that I don't have time for anymore. It's hard. I'm having to be very selective. Okay. Luster. Seriously, we have been blessed with such beautiful covers this month. Luster. So we actually just talked about Luster in my class that I just signed off from. Luster, I feel like I'm saying this a lot. Beautiful writing. I would say generally held up to the hype on Bookstagram. I was skeptical, but it generally held up to the hype. We've been studying autofiction in one of my grad school classes, which is sort of like a subgenre of fiction and poetry and screenplay as well that like blurs the line between autobiography and fiction. And apparently Raven Leilani has come out and said that this is not autofiction, it's entirely fiction. Although I was reading it as if it was like somewhat autobiographical because, I don't know, there's just something about it that felt very close, near and dear to the author's heart. But it's about a young woman who works in publishing in New York City. She's also a visual artist, and she gets involved with a man who's in an open marriage. And there's this like amazingly written scene at the beginning where he takes her to Six Flags. He's a much older man, so just kind of like the way that their dynamic plays out is really just like fascinating, especially if you're into character. And then through a series of unexpected events, she actually ends up living in this man's home with his wife. So you can imagine that things get a little awkward. But I really appreciated the way it shows the way that like different relationships can play out among women. And the writing was stunning. So I actually think I'll probably reread this at some point. It's really short. I don't even think it's 200 pages. It's like just 200 pages. And I think I was like so into it that I maybe read it a little quickly. So I think down the road, I'll probably reread this just because I think there's probably more to be gained from it. But I'm going to go ahead and give it an SSR. Love Your Life. Okay, I feel like I've talked about this quite a bit, and I may have even talked about it at the Patreon party, so I won't spend too much time on it. But I will say again that this is my favorite of Sophie Kinsella's recent novels. My major criticism of it is the main character, which I've talked about again quite a bit. Basically, what bothered me is that at the beginning we meet Ava, who's the main character, and she has gone to a writing retreat because she wants to finish her romance novel that she's been working on forever. And I was like, this is so cool. I'm really into reading books about writers and about writing lately. And that was actually one of the things that drew me to this book. But then, like, as soon as she's at the retreat, she gets totally distracted by a guy who's there. And I was sort of annoyed with her about that. And his name is Dutch. Well, that's kind of his like code name at the retreat. And she falls so head over heels in love with him that they decide to keep things going back in the real world outside of the retreat. She's gotten like none of her writing done. She has not come close to finishing her novel. Instead, she's just fallen in love with this guy who, spoiler alert, it's like a tough relationship because they've only gotten to know each other in the context of this like very idealized writing retreat. So she was a little grating because it was a lot of like, how do I make this man happy? I don't have any focus in my life. So while she was grading, I do think that like she was very real in that way. And I wanted to like sit her down and give her advice. As annoying as she was, and I've talked to a bunch of you who've said that she is annoying, I think she's meant to be. I don't think this is an author who's writing about a character who she thinks is like so fantastic and is missing the fact that she is driving everybody bananas. So that's reassuring. Like, I think that there's a very clear character arc in which Sophie Kinsella was like, this character is going to be very annoying and she's going to become much less annoying through an evolution of growth. She's going to learn about herself. She's going to learn about the world. She's going to get some things accomplished. So I will reassure you that she does experience growth. And that made me feel better about it. Plus, there's just a little bit of extra Sophie Kinsella magic in this book, more so than I've seen in a lot of her recent books. I love the description. She just builds this really cool, funky London world. They're all of these fun characters. Ava has this awesome friend group. Dutch has this awesome friend group, and we get to know all of these like 20-somethings, 30-somethings living in London. It felt fun. Like I kind of wanted to see an adaptation of it. So I'm going to give this, I'm torn between an SS and an SSR. If I could put it exactly halfway between, I would. I'm going to say that my experience reading it was SSR because it was a lot of fun. Like I had a good time reading it. I feel like I went through the journey with these characters, but the objective part of me, my head is telling me that this is probably an SS. Yeah. And now I'm going to give you a little Ducks Newburyport update because a lot of people have asked me how it's going and what I'm thinking about it. So here, I'll give you an idea of how much progress I've made so far. It's not bad. I didn't mean to say it's not bad as in the book is not bad and I'm surprised about that. I meant to say my progress is not bad. I've been reading about 10 pages of it every night. I've only missed one night, and that was last night, which was maybe why I didn't sleep well. I was thinking about that. That might have been like the one element of my routine that I differed on last night. But I've been reading 10 pages every night. It's like my bed book. And I mean, because I don't want to like carry it all over the house, honestly. And I'm really enjoying it. It is dense. I mean, hello. It's a lot of words. And to read 10 pages takes a solid like 20, 25 minutes. But what I'm finding is that I am just like not getting caught up in like what I'm supposed to think about it, what something's supposed to mean, because this is a stream of consciousness book and it's about this woman who's just like living her life. I was going to say, I don't even know what her name is. She's an Ohio housewife and I'm just experiencing her day with her. I'm hearing her random thoughts about the things happening around her. I'm hearing how she connects things she sees to her children, to her former relationships, to her parents. And if I don't quite understand how one clause like fits into her larger narrative, I don't worry about it. I keep going because I think that's the way like we as humans are wired to think. And so I'm not allowing myself to like worry about whether or not I'm interpreting the stream of consciousness 100% perfectly. Instead, I'm just kind of realizing that like this book is full of like really interesting lists, and it resonates with me a lot in terms of like the things that I notice in my life and the things that maybe sometimes I think about. And I don't know, it does sort of like beg the question of like, if you were to write a stream of consciousness that honestly accounted for every moment of your day, what are the random thoughts that you would have and how would you integrate them? So I'm really enjoying it. It is sort of relaxing. It's like a meditation on just like being a human. It's just very long. So my plan is, to keep reading like about 10 pages a night. I'm bummed that I didn't make my usual 10 pages last night. And I think I'll just keep including like monthly updates about how it's going in these videos. I'm not going to give it a rating. I'll say right now my experience is an SSR. I don't think I had any expectations of it, and I'm liking it. It's not like anything I've read before. But I would say if you're thinking about picking it up and you're like daunted by the size, which I understand, read it. Pick it up. Give it a chance. There you go. That's what I have for you for January. I'm going to let you know that the February video could be interesting. I don't know how much fun reading I'm going to get to this month, but whatever it is, I will be sure to share it with you in next month's video. Thank you as always for your support. I appreciate you so much, and I will talk to you soon.